Well, hi everyone, and congratulations, you've made it to week number 30 here on our Chronological Bible-in-a-Year reading challenge. That is no small feat, I'm proud of you, well done. This week we're reading 4 Psalms, just one chapter of narrative, 2 Kings 19, and a whole stack of Isaiah 31 through to 53, some many familiar chapters in there for you, as the focus of the narrative comes on Jerusalem and its impending destruction sometime in the future. But until then, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's tutorial. Here we go. So here we are. We are well and truly into Isaiah. We're going to be reading another 22 chapters of Isaiah this week. 4 of them are narrative. Okay, most of it's prophecy, but 4 of them are narrative, which basically mirrors 1 Kings 19 and 20, which is the narrative we're going to be reading in Kings this week. So I'll give you a little bit of an idea of the narrative story, where we're at so far and what's going to happen this week, and then highlight a few things to you that I want you to pay attention to, particularly as you read Isaiah. Okay, here we go. The kingdom of Israel, of course, has had it split, and the northern kingdom is destroyed. The Assyrians have come through and taken it away. So our focus now is back on the south. Basically, the southern kingdom is all that's left of Israel, okay? Is all that's left of God's covenant nation is there in Judah and Jerusalem. So that's where the attention of the narrative and certainly of Isaiah's prophecies now stand. Now, fortunately for them down south in Jerusalem, they've got a good king, Hezekiah, who is a man who relies on God. Okay, so he prays. Isaiah is his right-hand prophet. And so the Assyrians, the very guys who destroyed Samaria, Israel in the north, 8 years later, they attack Jerusalem. But because of prayer and prophecy, God fights that army off, and Jerusalem is spared. For now. Okay, for now, because the other thing we see this week is that Isaiah predicts the day will come when Jerusalem will fall under the fire and fury of a foreign army, because they, like their northern brothers, will also disobey God and Torah, and a foreign nation will come and take them out. It won't be the Assyrians, it won't be right now, but it will come sometime into the future, and the nation that will do that will be the Babylonians. And so this is where you need to pay attention. There are 3 foreign kingdoms that are really important, that are all get a mention in the narrative this week. Number 1, the Assyrians, the guys who destroyed the north but won't destroy Jerusalem. The Babylonians, who at some point in the future will destroy Jerusalem. And then Isaiah prophesies another king, or another kingdom, another king. And he names a guy called Cyrus, who will come from another kingdom and destroy Babylon and then restore God's people back to Jerusalem. Now that is incredible. He names a king that will not even be born for another 100 years or so. All right. He names the future king of Persia. So Isaiah, this is one of the reasons he is a major prophet. God gives him specific names of rulers that are going to come well into the future. And so we see here we're having a hint, a real clue as to what's going to be happening over the next couple of 100 years in Jerusalem's history, or the history of the Jewish people. So you need to pay attention to that. Most of what you're going to read this week is in Isaiah. There are a couple of Psalms. 2 of them are like, yay, God will never let Jerusalem be destroyed. And then the other one's like, God did let Jerusalem be destroyed. Please restore us. Okay, so it has both of these contexts to it. But mainly what you're going to be reading is Isaiah. And I just want to remind you of stuff I shared the other week on the How to Read the Prophets video. Please pay attention to the audience. Remember, over the last few weeks, we've got real used to reading about Israel, Judah, Israel, Judah. Well, now that northern kingdom Israel's taken away. So he's only addressing the south. But he calls the south Israel, the name that used to be in the north, because it's the only part of the nation of Israel that's left now. So don't think he's prophesying to the northern kingdom anymore. We're done. That's water under the bridge. That's past. He is prophesying to the south, even though he calls them Israel. He's doing that because that's all that's left of the Israelite nation. So just be aware of that. You may get confused there. I actually want to encourage you, before you read Isaiah this week, to go back and read Deuteronomy 32, Moses' prophetic song. And the reason I want to do that is because you're going to notice a lot in the prophecies of Isaiah this week. Oh, there comes the wind. You're going to be noticing a lot in the Isaiah prophecies. He says, listen, this destruction that I'm prophesying against you, is something that God told us would happen way back in the ancient times. And I believe he's referring to Deuteronomy 32 there. So read that, because he uses a lot of Moses' language. I also want you to notice the incredible time jumps that Isaiah makes. You know, it occurred to me this week that no sooner does he prophesy Jerusalem will in the future be destroyed, that immediately he prophesies what will happen when it's restored again. You know, the destruction hasn't even happened, and yet he's prophesying the return of the exile that would come. So he really does make big leaps and jumps in his prophecy. Just have that timeline in your head. And the other thing, with those three kingdoms in mind, okay? And the other thing I want you to have in mind, or to pay attention to, is many of the contrasts that he makes in his prophecies. On one hand, you're going to notice him talking about his servant Israel, who is unfaithful to his covenant, and then his servant who is to come, who will be faithful and will speak with wisdom, a servant that will suffer on behalf of his people. All right? We're going to finish our readings this week in Isaiah 53, which you all know is talking about the coming of Jesus. In fact, get this, Isaiah 53 is quoted almost 40 times in the New Testament. Get out your highlighter. Awesome stuff coming toward the end of our readings this week in Isaiah. But notice that the contrast he makes between Israel being my unfaithful servant, but this future servant being faithful in his role. He's also going to contrast and say, you know, just like God made a path through the sea and released us from Egypt, so in the future, he's going to make a path in the desert and release us from Babylon. In the future, Zion will become a shining city to the nations once more. But as you read these prophecies, one of the things that an advantage you and I have, is the advantage of being, you know, beyond the first century writings of the apostles. We have an understanding that these prophecies, while they sound like will take place in the near future with King Cyrus, who Isaiah actually calls the anointed one. He literally calls this future King Cyrus the Messiah. Okay, while it sounds like King Cyrus will be their Messiah and have a restoration to the land, you and I know that the ultimate Messiah he's prophesying about is Jesus, who will in the future, bring about not just a physical restoration to a physical land, but will bring God's people to a divine spiritual restoration to a heavenly Jerusalem and a heavenly Mount Zion, to a heavenly king called Jesus. You see, 1 Peter 1:11 says that when the prophets like Isaiah prophesied about the Messiah and the suffering servants, he literally says that, when they prophesied about the sufferings and the glories that were to follow those sufferings, the prophets did not understand the true timing, and they did not understand the true nature of what it is they were foretelling. Isaiah thought he was prophesying about a Messiah called Cyrus, yet you and I know in retrospect he was actually prophesying this great mystery of a suffering servant who would be the very Son of God himself, the very promised King of David, all right? Not a king of a foreign nation, King of David, that the other prophets we've read a few weeks ago were all prophesying about as well. Wow, okay, anyway, there's a lot here in this story. Enjoy your readings this week. Get your highlighter out, because there's some really encouraging stuff in Isaiah, and there's going to be a lot of familiar passages to you there as the prophet Isaiah focuses on the great hope that is going to come once Jerusalem eventually falls to the hands of the Babylonians. All right, bless you guys. You're going to enjoy this week's readings, and I'll see you next week for week number 31. Bye.
That's it for today's lesson. I really hope you enjoy your readings this week. Remember, allow yourself time to read as much as you can in one sitting. Don't get lost in the detail. Just keep going and watch the Bible's big story unfold before you. Remember also to hit me up on our social media channels or website, and I'll see you next time.